Welcome to Use a Query Object if you have an urge for SQL in BC. Hey, I'm Eric, and usually when we develop anything in Business Central, we always work with the data on table level, and then we handle the tables to AL, which is quite different from how you actually work with data in SQL. But we actually do have something that kind of looks like SQL, but also looks like AL in Business Central. And that is called the query object, which is probably one of the least used object types we have, rivaling the XML port a lot, right, these days. But the idea behind a query object is that we can go and create a select statement, more or less, but the syntax is slightly different, but we kind of get the same result. So in cases where we do need to combine tables into a flat structure of some sort, we can actually use a query object to let the SQL server that's still behind the scene and running, etc., let the SQL server do all the hard work and then just use the data. So let me show you how you build a query object. So I have just started a simple thing here I have just one object, which is a query object. And the first thing you do is that you tell what element that actually you can do. There's a lot of different properties, and maybe we get back to some of them in a bit, but let's just create something very simple. So the query object kind of looks like when you're defining a report, when you're defining the data set. So it's kind of the same structure. So the first thing we need is a data item. So I'll create it, and each data item should have a name. Actually, just like you do in SQL, when you name the different components inside a select statement, so you can know when you're talking about a field in which part of the select statement the field goes. So I'll do sales header here and simply do sales header. I need to add some columns. I can use the always brilliant AZAL DevTools to let me add a document type and a number and a document date. And how about what should we go for? Let's go to cell 2. Actually, let's do cell 2. How about that? Cell 2, we got the customer number. We want the customer name. So document type, number, document date, cell 2, customer, cell 2. So actually, before we got partial records, this was one of the ways to work with partial record sets. So the idea behind maybe are you a subscriber? If you're a subscriber, then thanks. If you're not a subscriber, if you want to ask me, hey Eric, how about doing a video on partial records? Become a subscriber and then put that down in the comments, or put anything else in comments. But do become a subscriber. The idea behind partial records is that if we have 1 million fields in a table and we only need to use 3 in a given situation, there's no reason to ask the SQL Server for everything. Now we can do that on regular records, but that used to be something that we could only do with the query object. So in this case, I have selected 1, 2, 3, 5-ish fields here. So if I run this, if I stop asking something to start, wow, that's a lot of browser tabs. Anyway, you can see that it ran the thing. We got the 5 columns. So we got a couple of quotes, some orders, and some invoices. So you could say that, hey Eric, so at this point, what's the difference between this and a page? Nothing. basically. This is slightly dumber than a page. It's just kind of showing the data, but it's not really a useful page. So you can see that if we do a filter on this one, we only have those fields, because from the BC's perspective, those are the only 5 fields that exist in this table, even though it's a query. So we are very limited here. So if we need to filter on this afterwards, we need to add whatever we want to filter on as a column. Anyway, I promised more. And what we can do here is that we can add another data element. So let's add a sales line. So I do sales line. And let's add some columns to that one also. So we'll add we'll add the type, the number, the description, the quantity, the unit price, and the amount. How about that? That almost makes sense, especially if I just reorder quantity and unit price. So now we got 2 arrows that we need to handle. We can see that we have 2 columns, both are called number. So that won't work. So we need to rename this column to line number, for instance. That's perhaps a bad. So let's do item number, even though that's almost as bad, because it could be what about type number? We have a type and then we have a number. So that would be type number. How about that? So, but we still have an error saying, hey, now you have 2 data elements that are one is indented under the other one. So you have to set a data item link. Okay, let's do that, data item link. And we're used to saying that, well, document, and there's sometimes be aware that IntelliSense is kind of weird on this one. Document type equal. So the syntax here is slightly different than what we're used to, for instance, on reports, where you kind of said, filter and cons and stuff like that, because now it has to be directly translatable to something that can be translated into a SQL query, a SQL select statement. So we'll do ss dot document type. So notice the equal signs here. It's kind of weird. So data item link equal, and then we have document type equal cell header document type, and we can do a comma, and then we can do document, and maybe this works, maybe it doesn't. So document number equal sales header number. So you can see maybe we're able to format this. I think as soon as surprised. So now we are told that the link between these 2 are that each sales line have to match a sales header. So that is pretty good. So now we can see that we got, for the, let's take the first order here that has, well, this one has 2 lines. So these 2. So there's 2 different items on the sales order. We can also see that there's a sales order number 1005 without a line. So now the line fields are blank. And this is where it gets, so if you're used to SQL, then you know exactly what I'm getting at. If you're not used to SQL, then the next thing might be slightly confusing. So we have a property here called SQL join type. So imagine we have these 2 things, and we have a sales header and a sales line. So what we saw now is what called left outer join. The resulting dataset contains every record from the upper data item table, even if a record does not have a matching value in the lower data item for fields that are linked by the data link property. So the upper data item table in this case is the sales header, and the lower data item in this case is the sales line. So if we do this and run again, we should get the exact same result as before. This line is still blank. Well, on the sales line fields at least, because this is a left outer join. So what other options do we have here? Well, let's try the opposite one, the right outer join. And let's see what happens here. So here's the confusing part, that we're talking about left and right, and the documentation talks about upper and lower. So upper is left, lower is right in this case. Just to make it super confusing. But what we can see now is that sales order, what was that, 1005? I think it was. Let's see what the last one here is. That's 4, yeah. Sales order 1005 is gone, because there is no data line, sales line, so there's never a trigger to build it into this. So now it's the controlling the data building part of the query is the sales lines, and since there were no sales line with 1005, then that sales header record is never in the data set. We have other options. We have an inner join. The resulting data set contains records from data item tables where a match is found between the fields that are linked by the data link item properties on the lower data item. So depending on how we look at it, it's more or less the same. There's some nuances here. There's also the weird one called cross joint, where you get all records in table A matched to all records in table B. So there is no, so if you select cross joint, we cannot have a data item link. And then we get every sales header combined with every sales line, which in this case doesn't make any sense. But in some weird cases where you're working with matrices between things, that this might be useful. So let's actually go back to undo, and then let's go back to just the regular. In this case, now I did it again. This is not a good F key night. The left outer joint. Oops. Okay, so now we have a query. So what can we do with a query? Well, let's try to. So what we could do, and I think we saw that just at the beginning, that we can actually publish the query as an API. So if you have something that is complex and you want this flattened structure exposed as an API to Power BI or to any other Power thing, Excel, whatever it is, then you can publish a query as an API. You also have the option of the data access intent, which is kind of interesting, where you can see if you set the data access intent to read only, then Microsoft might, here is the, they might choose, depending on the scenario where lots of stuff. They might decide that this query can run off the copy data. So right now, when Microsoft is hosting the system, you have a database, and then you have a hot backup, hot spare running a copy of the database. So if something happens with the primary database, they can switch over, run you on the secondary database. The secondary database being replicated all the time, so being a couple of seconds behind. But in general, since it's only write transactions that are replicated, so then this database do not see as much traffic as the primary one. So in some cases, we can have the advantage of, if we can put a lot of reporting stuff onto that second database, we get better performance overall. This is one thing you can do with queries. I thought there was one other thing I wanted to mention here. I can't remember what that is. Let's see. So we talked about you can put queries into the query category. There's a video on that. If you subscribe, you've seen that one. You can also limit the number of rows. That was the one I was thinking about. We don't care about that right now. Anyway, so what happens if we have, so let's create a new file, test page, al, page something, test page, trigger. I think I broke it again. I am an absolute expert in breaking this thing. On open page. Let's see if we can. We cannot. So let me just go and reload this thing. Do launch and say that now I want to launch query page instead of query when I run. So if I create the query here as a variable, query, what did we call it? Query test. Or maybe this page gets a little sad that we don't have a layout. You see, I broke it. Oh, I broke it. Let's see if it's happier now. There we go. So now I have a query object. So what can I do with a query object? Well, you can see that the query object has all the fields I know. And they're named like I named them in a query object, so type number is type number. But what can I actually do? Well, I can open a query. And when I'm done with the query, I can close it again. I can, let's see what we got. Column category, we can look at the filters. We can read. We can save as something, which is pretty cool. And we can set filters. So if I do, and you can see the read was, let me find that one again. So read is a Boolean. So we can do something, say while q read. So as long as we can read off the query, so that just for a moment there, I totally went into C# mode and said while, and then parentheses. There's a momentary lapse of remembering what language I was coding in. Anyway, so in this case, we can do, let's just do message something, and then q dot document type, q dot number, q dot item number. I think it was. What did we call it? Type number. We did not call it item number. We call it type number. Exactly that. So let's try this and see how it goes. And you can see the effect of putting a ton of message on top of each other, that you get this black hole kind of effect, which is perhaps cool. Anyway, you can see that we got all our data here. So all is well. We opened the query. We could have set some filters. Then we do a read. And when we're done, we're closing it. So a very easy way to, let's actually see if I can, how many of these I can kill. There we go. So a very easy way to, if we need to read a complex and perhaps a big data set, we can build the optimal query, because this will be turned into the equivalent SQL without any of all the crazy stuff that sometimes goes on with BC and SQL. So this is as close to SQL as you can get. And then it's a matter of open it, read it, close it again. So often not used. This, as I said, that this query and XML port are probably the two least used object types, but both have some pretty cool features. Anyway, thanks for watching. I suggest you check out, let me see if I can point right, this one. That's another good one. I'll see you there. Take care. Bye.